Richard Sterling, the billionaire CEO, thought he could humiliate Gloria Hayes, a quiet janitor, and get away with it. He forced her to her knees in a spectacle of power, but his arrogant laughter was short-lived. He didn't know Gloria had a secret. A quiet resolve, a sharp mind, and a plan. Her revenge would not only get justice, but would also shatter his entire $2 billion empire. The marble floors of Sterling Dynamics gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting Gloria Hayes' weary movements as she pushed her cleaning cart through the empty hallways. For 20 years, these halls had been her office. She knew every crack in the tile, every squeak of the glass doors, every secret hum of the building's ventilation system. Her hands, calloused and strong, had polished the very surfaces that billionaires walked on, and she found a quiet dignity in her work. Her value wasn't measured in dollars, but in the pride she took in a job well done. She was more a silent guardian than a janitor, a ghost moving through the early morning hours, restoring order after the chaos of a busy workday. The company had grown around her, from a small tech startup into a towering $2 billion empire, a concrete and glass monument to a success she had helped build. Yet a success that had no space for her in its official narrative. She was invisible, a necessary utility, and to the executives who filled the building by day, she was less a person and more a cleaning tool, and they looked through her as though she wasn't there at all. Richard Sterling, on the other hand, measured value in one currency alone: power. He was the architect of the $2 billion empire, a man with a charisma as polished as his custom shoes. He strode through the office one evening, surrounded by his laughing executives, their voices echoing in the late-night quiet. They were celebrating a new acquisition, their spirits high, and their respect for the building's infrastructure, and its silent caretakers, non-existent. Gloria, in her quiet corner, was nothing more than a momentary obstacle, a person to be looked through, not at. She was an inconvenient shadow in the blinding light of their success, a reminder of a world they no longer belonged to. His laugh was a booming, arrogant sound that always seemed to fill a room, a sound of a man who believed the world was his for the taking. He had clawed his way to the top, leaving a trail of broken promises and discarded employees in his wake, and he had come to believe that his success was a direct result of his ruthless efficiency. He saw the world as a game of chess, and every person, including the quiet janitor, was just a pawn to be moved or sacrificed. That night, the shadows were not enough. Sterling, flushed with victory and champagne, saw Gloria, and a cruel spark ignited in his eyes. He stopped his entourage, and with a smile, he ordered her to clean the shoes of success, forcing her to her knees in front of his executives, their laughter echoing through the atrium. Their ridicule was a physical blow, stripping her of her dignity, trying to reduce her to nothing more than a servant. As she knelt there, the world seemed to slow down. She felt the weight of every slight, every condescending glance, every moment of invisibility over the last 2 decades crash down upon her, leaving her utterly exposed. But in the quiet, agonizing moments after the executives had moved on, the humiliation did not break her. It hardened her. A fire ignited in the pit of her stomach, a cold, steady flame of righteous anger. They had laughed at her, not knowing that she possessed a resilience forged in the fires of a lifetime of struggle. They thought they had seen her at her weakest, a powerless woman on her knees, but they were wrong. She would rise from this, not with tears, but with a plan. That night, Gloria Hayes made a silent promise. Richard Sterling had owned a moment of her dignity, but she would soon own the ruin of his entire empire. She would make them all pay. The humiliation was a turning point, not an end. It was the moment the invisible woman became a ghost with a purpose. She realized that for years she had been a fly on the wall, and now she would use that invisibility as her greatest weapon. She had heard snippets of conversations in hushed tones late at night, seen discarded documents in shredder bins, and noticed patterns that others dismissed. She had been a silent witness to 1,000 small moments of corporate deceit. Now, she would remember them all. She knew the rhythm of the building better than anyone. She knew which offices were left unlocked, which executives stayed late, and which filing cabinets were left ajar. Her memory was a vast, silent archive of Sterling's secrets. She began to see her routine not as a chore, but as an opportunity. The cleaning cart was no longer just a tool for mopping floors. It was her mobile headquarters, a vessel for reconnaissance. The hallways became her battlegrounds, and the trash cans, her intelligence sources. Every shred of paper, every overheard whisper, every late-night delivery was now a clue in a puzzle that would lead to Sterling's downfall. Gloria spent the next several days meticulously executing her plan. She began to document everything. She used her phone to take photos of documents left on desks. She made mental notes of conversations she overheard, and she began to cross-reference the information she was gathering. She found evidence of a shell corporation used to funnel money from Sterling Dynamics. She discovered emails detailing a plan to illegally lay off hundreds of employees to increase the stock price. And she found a USB drive that had been left in a discarded coffee cup, which contained spreadsheets of off-the-books transactions. Her anger fueled her, giving her the energy to work long hours without complaint. She was no longer just a janitor. She was an investigator. She was a woman on a mission, a woman with a purpose. She was the one who would bring down the mighty Sterling Dynamics and its CEO, and she would do it with nothing but her determination and the evidence she was collecting one piece at a time. The quiet of the late-night office now held a different kind of tension for Gloria, a thrill of the hunt. She moved with newfound grace and focus, her senses heightened. A faint smell of expensive cologne led her to a desk where a hurried executive had left a tablet unlocked. A late-night phone call from a closed office echoed through the ventilation, and Gloria's trained ear caught fragments of a panicked conversation about offshore accounts. She was no longer just cleaning up their messes. She was cataloging them. Each piece of dirt, each forgotten file, a new brick in the foundation of their future prison. She realized her greatest asset was her invisibility. No one would ever suspect the janitor. They would talk freely in her presence, assuming she was nothing more than a silent piece of furniture. They would toss sensitive documents into the shredder bins, not realizing Gloria had a method to recover and reassemble them in the break room after they had all gone home. She was a human security flaw, a loophole in their corporate fortress, and they had created her by underestimating her. The more she gathered, the more she realized the depth of the corruption. It wasn't just a few bad actors. It was a systemic problem, a culture of greed and deception that started at the very top with Sterling himself. The quiet resolve she had felt in the moments after her humiliation grew into a fierce, unwavering commitment. This wasn't just revenge. It was a moral crusade. She would expose the truth, not just for herself, but for all the invisible people who had been walked on and ignored. She would be the voice for the voiceless, the one who would finally make them listen. The journey ahead was long and treacherous, but she was no longer alone in her fight. The ghost of Sterling Dynamics was about to become its greatest fear. The silent threat began with a single discarded coffee cup. It was late, past midnight, when Gloria found it, half full and forgotten on a desk in the finance department. The executive, a nervous junior analyst named Kevin, had been working late, and in his rush to leave, he had left his tablet unlocked. Gloria, with a heart thumping in her chest, slowly and deliberately used a cleaning cloth to wipe a non-existent smudge from the screen. She saw an open spreadsheet, a complex web of numbers and codes that made no sense to her at first. But a quick photo with her phone, a memory of the spreadsheet's title, Project Hydra, and she had her first lead. Over the next 2 weeks, Project Hydra became her obsession. She began to notice the small things. A recurring name, Triton Holdings, on documents, a series of suspicious wire transfers, and hushed conversations between Sterling and his chief financial officer. The more she looked, the more the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together. The company's deep-seated corruption was not a secret to those who paid attention. Gloria began to see the patterns. The late-night shredding sessions were always followed by a surge in a specific offshore account. The hushed phone calls from Sterling's office were always about managing optics after a major financial deal. The more she delved, the more she found. One night, while wiping down a conference room, she found a crumpled napkin with a series of scrawled numbers and a name. Marcus Thorne. A quick search on her phone revealed Marcus was a disgraced former data analyst who had been fired from Sterling Dynamics a year ago. The official reason was insubordination. But Gloria's instincts told her there was more to the story. She found his personal blog, where he had written cryptic posts about the dragon in the castle and the corruption beneath the glass. She had found her first potential ally. Gloria's alliance with Marcus was not an easy one to forge. She sent him a cryptic email from a burner account, mentioning a small detail only someone with intimate knowledge of the company would know. He was skeptical at first, but she kept sending him small, verifiable pieces of information she was gathering. She was a ghost with a memory, and he, a man who had been unjustly cast out, became her ears on the outside. He started cross-referencing her information with public records, financial reports, and news articles. Together, they began to paint a picture of a massive web of corruption. They found evidence of money laundering through Triton Holdings, a company that existed only on paper. And they found proof of a coordinated campaign to manipulate the company's stock price by fabricating positive news stories. The dragon in the castle was Sterling himself, and the corruption beneath the glass was the very foundation of his empire. Their network expanded. Marcus, using his old connections, reached out to a veteran financial journalist named Sarah Jenkins, a woman known for her tenacity and her moral compass. Sarah had always been suspicious of Sterling's rapid rise to power, but she lacked the hard evidence she needed to expose him. Gloria's and Marcus's information was the key she had been looking for. The journalist was initially wary of getting her information from a janitor and a disgraced analyst, but the evidence Gloria and Marcus provided was undeniable. The spreadsheets, the photos of documents, the timestamps of conversations, it was all there, a perfect airtight case. The three of them, a janitor, a data analyst, and a journalist, formed a silent, unholy alliance, united by a common goal: to bring down Richard Sterling and his corrupt empire. They were the shadows of the corporate world, the ones no one ever saw coming, and they were about to expose a truth that would shake the very foundations of the business world. Gloria's work became a second life, a covert operation conducted in the dead of night. She learned to pick locks, bypass alarm sensors in her designated areas, and even retrieve data from hard drives left in the trash. The building, once her workplace, was now a crime scene she was investigating. She found a ledger in an old filing cabinet detailing illegal payoffs to city officials for permits and tax breaks. She found evidence that Sterling had been using company funds to pay off political figures to get favorable legislation passed. The scope of his corruption was staggering. It was not just about money, it was about power, about controlling every aspect of his world, from the boardroom to the political arena. He was a man who believed he was above the law, and Gloria was about to prove him wrong. Her investigation was no longer just about personal revenge. It was about justice. It was about exposing a man who had built his empire on the backs of others. A man who had destroyed lives and walked away with a smile on his face. She would be the one to wipe that smile off his face forever. The plan was a symphony of precision and timing, a masterstroke designed to hit Sterling where it would hurt the most: his reputation and his wealth. The final piece of the puzzle was a live broadcast of Sterling's annual shareholders' meeting, where he would be announcing the company's record-breaking profits and his plans for a major new expansion. Gloria and her allies saw this as the perfect stage for their grand finale. They would use the media to their advantage, ensuring that the entire world would witness Sterling's fall from grace. They decided to make their move on the day of the meeting, at the exact moment Sterling was at the height of his arrogance. The plan was simple, yet brilliant. They would send a massive data dump of all the evidence they had collected to Sarah Jenkins's news outlet, while simultaneously planting a copy of the damning information on a projector at the shareholders' meeting itself. The trap was set with meticulous care. Marcus created a script that would automatically project a series of slides onto the screen at a pre-programmed time, revealing the company's secrets one by one. The first slide would show the Shell Corporation, Triton Holdings, and its ties to Sterling Dynamics. The second would detail the illegal layoffs and stock manipulation. The third would expose the political payoffs and the ledger of bribes. Each slide would be a new nail in Sterling's coffin. Gloria, with her unparalleled knowledge of the building, would be the one to plant the laptop with the projector, ensuring that the script was executed without a hitch. The pressure was immense. But she was a woman on a mission. A woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. A life of being overlooked, of being underestimated. And now she would prove them all wrong. The day of the shareholders' meeting was a blur of nervous energy. Gloria moved through the building with a new kind of confidence. She had her mission, and nothing could stop her. She slipped into the main conference room, pretending to polish the podium, and with a swift, practiced movement, she connected the laptop to the projector. She set the timer and backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. She was a silent observer, a ghost in the machine, and she was about to pull the plug on the entire operation. As Sterling took the stage, his smile a mask of arrogance and self-satisfaction, Gloria stood in the back, a quiet storm brewing. He began his speech, his voice booming with confidence, talking about the company's success and his plans for the future. The crowd listened, captivated, unaware of the impending disaster. At the pre-programmed moment, the lights in the room dimmed, and the projector screen came to life, not with Sterling's carefully crafted presentation, but with the first slide of Gloria's presentation. The crowd gasped as they saw the words, "Project Hydra, a web of corporate corruption." Sterling froze, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. The second slide appeared, detailing the illegal activities and stock manipulation. The room erupted in chaos. People began to talk, to whisper, to pull out their phones and take photos of the screen. Sterling's face turned from shock to pure, unadulterated rage. He screamed at his executives, demanding to know what was happening, but it was too late. The news was already breaking on every major news outlet. thanks to Sarah Jenkins, who had just released her own bombshell report. The $2 billion empire, a monument to greed and arrogance, was now a house of cards, and Gloria Hayes had just blown on it. The aftermath was a scene of pure, glorious chaos. Reporters swarmed the building, shareholders demanded answers, and Sterling, his face pale with fury, was escorted from the stage by his security team. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the faces of his employees, his allies, his investors, trying to find the one person responsible for his downfall. He saw Gloria in the back, her face calm, her eyes meeting his. She gave him a small, knowing smile, a silent message that spoke volumes. "You wanted me on my knees, but I was always standing." The message was clear. She was not a victim. She was the hero. She was not a servant. She was the architect of his ruin. She had won. The once invisible janitor had become the most powerful person in the room, and she had done it with nothing but her determination and the truth. The fall of Richard Sterling's empire was swift and brutal. The dominoes began to fall the moment the news broke. The company's stock plummeted, dropping more than 50% in a single day. Major clients, afraid of being associated with a scandal of this magnitude, began to pull out. Lawsuits from disgruntled employees and shareholders flooded the courts. The SEC launched a full-scale investigation, and the FBI raided the company's offices, seizing documents and computers. Sterling, who had always believed he was above the law, was now a public spectacle. His face plastered on every news channel, his name synonymous with greed and corruption. He was a pariah, a man who had once been on top of the world, now on the bottom. The man who had once humiliated a janitor was now a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when you build your empire on a foundation of lies. The consequences were not just financial. They were personal. His family disowned him. His friends turned their backs on him, and his reputation was forever destroyed. The man who had once been the toast of the town was now a lonely, desperate man, facing years in prison for his crimes. The $2 billion empire he had built was a wasteland, a monument to his downfall. But in the midst of this chaos, a new narrative was beginning to emerge. A story of an unlikely hero, a silent warrior who had brought down a giant. The story of Gloria Hayes, the janitor who had shattered a $2 billion empire, was now on every news channel. She was no longer invisible. She was a hero. She was an inspiration. Her story resonated with millions of people who had been walked on, who had been ignored, who had been made to feel like they were nothing. The justice served was swift and complete. Richard Sterling was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to a long prison term, and his vast fortune was seized by the government to pay for his crimes and to compensate the thousands of people he had harmed. The man who had once ordered a janitor to clean his shoes was now scrubbing floors in a federal penitentiary. The irony was not lost on Gloria. She had not sought revenge for the sake of it. She had sought justice, and she had found it. She had proven that true power was not measured in wealth or status, but in character, in integrity, and in the willingness to fight for what is right. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had stood up for everyone who had ever been treated like they were less than. In the end, Gloria's story was not just about revenge. It was about the new beginning she had created. With the help of the money from a foundation set up with the seized funds from Sterling's assets, she started a union for workers, a place where people could find a voice, a place where they would be respected and treated with dignity. She became a public advocate, a speaker, and a symbol of hope. She used her newfound influence to create positive change, to make sure that no one else would ever have to go through what she did. The story of Gloria Hayes, the janitor who had shattered a $2 billion empire, became a legend, a reminder that the quiet, dignified heroes are often the ones who change the world. She had proven that the true strength of a person is not in their power or their wealth, but in their character, in their courage, and in their ability to rise from the ashes of humiliation and turn their pain into purpose. She had won, not by becoming a billionaire, but by becoming a hero, and her story would be told for generations to come.